Hello, YouTube. Welcome back to the Graybeard Astrology channel. I'm Jim. Going to be talking about a few things here, and they'll kind of connect together and stuff. So to talk about one is to talk about the other, and they all kind of bleed into each other. So I don't know how I'm going to bounce around a little bit. I've been working, trying to figure out how to put this all together without making a really long video. So I'm going to try and keep this a little bit short. I don't know. I'm making this up as I go. I hope you don't mind. So mainly I want to talk about primary motion. Now, well, first let me say, if you're just want to get to the information or something like that, I'll probably put timestamps in here and stuff like that. But just to get a little personal, first right now. So if you're not interested in the personal story, feel free to skip ahead, no problem. In the meantime, hit the subscribe button and the like button if you would. I'd appreciate it. You know how it goes. But just to get personal here for a minute. So I've been studying astrology for a really, for a long time. And, not in a straight line, on and off. A lot of years in the late 90s, I got really involved. And then, somewhere in the 2006 or 7, I kind of, got a little disinterested. And then I got really back into it, 8-9 years later. So, 2017, 18, I got really back into it again. So anyway, my point being is that I had been studying it on and off and stuff for a really long time. But until I really was struck when I learned about primary motion, and it really, kind of touched me, in a way that other techniques or explanations, I should say, it's more of about a explanation of why the chart is the way it is, or the rationale. Maybe it's just the rationale behind the creation of the chart of the system, maybe that's what it was. But anyway, it just struck me. And my point being is that this is a bit of a rudimentary kind of like basic, some of the basic principles of astrology. But it's something that I wasn't aware of until I had been studying for such a long time. And it was, or I should say, it was never explained to me in this way. And it's something that I've never, maybe, just passed me by or something like that. But when you're studying astrology, I always interested in your chart, how it fits, how things fit in your chart, or ways to delineate certain things. And what I found so fascinating about this is just the rationale behind why things are the way they are. So I don't know. It just really struck me years ago when I first came across this, and some of this is what I like so much about the traditional style of astrology. And I just don't. Maybe I haven't found it yet. Maybe I'm missing something, but I've never found the rationale and the explanation of why things are the way they are in astrology. I've never found that in modern astrology. That's I find just so fascinating about the old traditional stuff, is the rationale, and it's just fascinating. And anyway, I just want to share that. So now we're going to discuss the two fundamental motions of the sky. There's the primary and the secondary motion. The primary motion is the daily uniform rotation of the sky from the vantage point on Earth. So really it's the rotation of the Earth itself. From our vantage point, the sky seems to be moving. Everything's moving in a clockwise motion, rising in the east and culminating overhead above us, as you can see in the picture, and then setting in the west. And then its anti-culmination is at the bottom of the chart, or the opposite side of the earth at that particular moment. This creates the 24-hour night and day cycle. It's also reflective of the seasonal year. The ascendant or the rising sign would be spring. The midheaven or culmination would be summertime. The descendant or the setting period would be fall. And then the anti-culmination or the MC or the IC, that would be winter and death and renewal. So this is the background motion that carries all the celestial bodies along perfectly and consistently. So now the secondary motion is the individual planets in a particular sign. The planets appear to be moving in a counterclockwise direction from our vantage point. The secondary motion refers to matter, which is always in flux and always changing, impermanent. So the secondary motion, by contrasting the primary motion, is the individual movement of the planets themselves. The word planet was a Greek word referred to as wandering stars, the wanderers. The celestial bodies moved eastward or counterclockwise through the zodiac at their own unique speed and orbit and latitudes, and in their own cycles, sometimes going in retrograde. And that's why they were wandering all over the place, as opposed to all the fixed stars that were always standing still. So these wanderers were rebels. They moved against the grain of the primary motion. So what does the primary motion look like in the chart? The primary motion is the daily path of the sun, if you will. The signs arise over the eastern horizon at dawn in the first house, or the ascendant. They culminate above head in the noontime sun, or the midheaven, or the MC, is the part of the chart where the sun reaches its highest point in that particular day. That is the culmination. And then they set again at the seventh house at dusk. And this cycle of generation, now they're calling it corruption, but it's just the cycle of the day, the cycle of life. So the primary motion dictates the cycle of the material existence. By forcing planets to rise in the east, they are brought into manifestation, and by dragging them to the west, they are forced into dissolution. Primary motion is the normal rotation of the Earth on its axis. Plato referred to primary motion as a relative to eternity. Everything moving in the same time factor consistently and forever, perfectly and divine and ideal. Secondary motion, the individual planets themselves. The planets appear to be moving in counterclockwise direction from our vantage point on Earth. So secondary motion refers to the material world, which is always in flux, always changing, impermanent. It is coming to be and passing away. So these four cardinal points, the ascendant, the midheaven, the descendant, and the IC, are the angular houses or the stakes. The ancients called them the goads, or the hinge points. These four places share the same angular modality, and they are the strongest houses in a chart. The angular houses dominate because of primary motion, making them the points of the greatest power and visibility. Planets in the angular houses are said to have 100% power. So without the primary motion, none of astrology that we know would exist. Primary motion is the fundamental engine. Because if the world stopped spinning or the earth stopped spinning, we would be in big trouble. So secondary motion is the apparent counterclockwise journey of the planets through the zodiac against this daily primary flow. Each of the planets has its own speed, its own cycle. Some go retrograde. And then there's also declination. This creates individuality in the planets and variations in the sky. Now, the ancients, the old guys, they saw primary motion as the realm of eternity. They considered it perfect, uniform, unchanging, and divine. Plato linked it with the ideal, the eternal. Everything moves in perfect harmony and forever in primary motion. Secondary motion, however, belongs to the material realm. It's changing, it's imperfect, it's always coming to be and passing away. Plato associated it with difference or flux and cycles of growth and birth and decay and death. So in this slide, the primary motion is the earth spinning or the sky, the planets rising and setting throughout the day. And then the secondary motion is how the planets are moving through the signs and through the sky if we're looking up at them. So the primary motion is meant to represent eternity and the divine. And the secondary motion is kind of meant of the material world. Everything in your material world is your own version of it, and it's going to come into being, exist, and then pass away. But things will always be there. It's just your version of it or your particular one, or you will come into being and pass away. So maybe some of the the foundation of primary and secondary motion are the core building blocks of the entire traditional astrology system. Everything flows from this. So we have the signs, the houses, the planets and their relationship is one thing. We have the essential dignities and the debilities. We have sect, night and day. We have the benefics and the malefics, and then the planetary joys. And these are some of the biggest building blocks in traditional astrology. So in essence, the primary motion represents the eternal, the divine order, the spiritual realm, the unchanging. The secondary motion represents the material world of flux, of karma, of circumstance and change. This is a deep philosophical background of traditional astrology. And it's something I don't find, or I haven't found, in modern astrology. I'm not saying somebody isn't out there talking about it, but I'm not aware of it. So the essence of it is that we're all spiritual beings having this human experience. The primary motion is eternal divine essence. The secondary motion is the human experience, the material journey, the material world, full of longing and desires and losses and impermanence. So sometimes, we being eternal beings often get lost in the material world. It's a cliche. We're all trying to fill the black hole, shopping for stuff or striving for stuff, maybe even achievement, or, we could even be chasing status, So now the planets being the wandering stars and timing. So the planets, those wandering stars, symbolize the material karma and material circumstance. Things that come into form, they change, and they'll pass away as life unfolds. So the ancients studied the celestial movements of the stars, the wandering stars, to glimpse the will of the divine and try and mitigate some of the challenges of fate. So that's the essence of the astrology study, was as a mitigation of fate. So by understanding when and how the wheels of fortune were turning, we can prepare ourselves to face the challenges of the material world, to face misfortune, and maybe have some humility and to find acceptance. The Stoic concept of nothing in the external should disrupt the internal self. Primary motion is a steady, divine backdrop. The secondary motion is a forecast, like a weather report for the world, for yourself, for your soul. It warns of sequences of coming and going in the material plane. It helps us balance the spiritual and the material life as the planets move through the signs and the houses. So astrology is teaching us to observe things in a fluctuation without getting swept away in the material world. By understanding timing of the material world, we can live wiser, and tolerate things a little bit easier. Astrologers always say is aligning. So we're aligning with the eternal, with that primary motion. So this distinction between the primary and secondary motion, or the internal divine and the material changing motion, it's a bigger metaphor of our spiritual self and the toils of life and the human experience. So we look to the wandering stars not for the prison of our fate, but we're looking for guidance in the weather of the storms. We're looking for, understanding and mitigation to be able to tolerate the storms of our human lives. So the houses in the angular framework, in whole sign houses, which is the original and the oldest house system, the original system in Hellenistic astrology. So the houses were arranged in the 4 primary pivot points, these goad points or stakes. I said, what's so funny about astrology is that there's 5 words for there's 5 different words that mean the same thing. Like the ascendant is also the rising sign, which is also the helm. So the angular houses are also the cardinal points. They're also the goads. They're also the stakes. So there's all these words that all mean the same thing. So these were the 4 primary pivot points, also called kentrons or goads, meaning sharp points or hinge points. So these angular places, the first house, the 4th house, the 7th house, and the 10th house, they are the most dynamic, most active, and most powerful positions in the chart. Planets are carried along by the primary motion of the day. The planets are carried along by the primary motion, the daily rotation of the sky. And when they hit these angular points, these 4 pivot points, they become goads. And goads were like a cattle prod or a hinge point. They push into action. The angular houses act as hinges or centers of power around which the entire chart is churning. The topics of the meanings of all the 12 houses derive from the relationship of these 4 angular houses, these 4 angles. And that's what's fascinating. The houses grouped into 4 angular triads or 4 sets of 3 houses centered around each angle. So these 4 houses connect to the 4 directions and the 4 elements. And then because there's 3 types of houses, 3 times 4 is 12, and that's how we get to the 12 different houses. So the 3 types of houses correlate with the 3 different types of modalities, the cardinal, the fixed, and the mutable. There are 3 categories of houses, and their relationship to the angles is due to the primary motions. So the angular houses are the 1st, the 7th, the 4th, and the 10th. They are the pivot points. They are the action points, the cardinal points. Planets here are at peak strength and peak visibility. So angular is always awesome. Well, most of the time awesome. The succedent houses, the 2nd house, the 5th, the 8th, and the 11th, they're also referred to as the post-essential. They follow the angles, and they're building stability and resources. So now these are things that are going to come to fruition a little later. Angular houses, their strength 100%. The succedent houses are things that are growing to be stronger. So a lot of times people say the succedent houses are houses that will flourish later in life. And then thirdly, we have the cadent houses, or the declining houses. They are the 3rd, the 6th house, the 9th house, and the 12th house. Now, they precede the angles. So they're associated with preparation, adjustment, and letting go. The primary motion dictates this hierarchy. Planets gain integrity and power as they approach an angle. They peak at that angle, and then they lose momentum and fall away in the motion of the day. So the 4 angles. So each angle serves as the center of the triad. We have one cadent house, which is falling away from the angle. We have the angle itself, which is the pivot point or the stake. And then we have a succedent house, which is approaching or building towards the next angle. So around the 1st house, or the ascendant, we have the 12th house, which is the cadent house falling away. And then we have the 1st angular house, which is the ascendant. And then we have the 2nd house, which is the succedent house, moving towards the 1st house, if you will, in primary motion. In the 10th house is the midheaven. The 9th house is the cadent house, which used to be the midheaven. So we have the 10th house angular, and then we have the 11th house, which is the succedent one in this triad. Then we have the 7th house, which is the descendant. The 6th house is the cadent one connected to this triad. And then we have the 7th is the angular, and the 8th is the succedent house of that group. Then we have the 4th house. The 3rd house is the cadent one. The 4th is the angular, and the 5th is the succedent. So these 4 houses moving towards the angle are generally more positive and constructive. The houses falling away from the angle tend to be weaker and more challenging. This dynamic explains much of the strength and the meaning behind the houses themselves. The planets in angular houses are the strongest. They are 100% potential and ability. They become prominent, active, excitable, often dominating a person's personality and the life and the events in their life. The 1st house, rising in the eastern horizon like the sun, in the morning. It's visible, it's strong, it's personal. 10th house, culminating at the noontime sky, if you will. This is peak achievement. This is the house of honors. The 10th house is the house of honors, public recognition. The 10th house was also seen as the house of the king. So if you did something good in the eyes of the king, you received honor and maybe riches. The 7th house is the setting house in the west, where the sun goes to die. Traditionally, this is connected with endings, but it's also connected with partnership and the setting of matters, the coming of fruition or the coming of conclusion. The 7th house is not actually considered as strong as the 1st house, but it is still an angular house, which is very nice. Technically, I believe that the 1st and the 10th were considered the best. And then the 7th and 4th were considered, very good, but not as good as the 1st and the 10th. The 4th house is called the anti-culmination or the midnight spot. This is also the subterranean house or the underworld. It's the most private house, foundational, maybe a little hidden, maybe the dark side. It's the dark side of the earth. The action of the 4th house pivot is to slingshot the planets back up towards the rising. So these are the critical movements in a 24-hour primary motion cycle. It begins, it peaks, it ends, and then comes into being again. The first angular triad, the ascendant, the most important part in the chart, also referred to as the helm. So the ancients thought of the life, they compared it to a trip on a boat or a trip at sea. And that's why the ascendant or rising sign was referred to as the helm. It was referring to the helm of the steering wheel of a boat or a ship, because life was the journey on the ocean of time. It's just fascinating. I love that. So cool. So the 1st house, or the rising of the sun at dawn, is the most personal place in the chart. The native themselves, their body, their essence, the health, the vitality, the physical appearance. So the helm was like the foundation from which all the other houses derived its meaning through their relationship with the helm or the rising sign. It's also where the joy of Mercury is. So the 1st house is the joy of Mercury. So a little something we haven't got into just yet, the joys of the houses. But just remember that Mercury finds its joy in the 1st house. So this is not necessarily the sign that Mercury likes to be in the most. This is the house that Mercury likes to be in the most, the place in the chart that Mercury finds its joy in. So in ancient times, astrologers noted the exact moment of events and omens. Timing was everything. Studying when the celestial bodies hit these angle points revealed divine patterns and helped, mitigate what they considered fatal matters. The primary motion carries the planets to these 4 angular pivot points, activating key life patterns and, pivot points. Understanding the houses and what type of triad they belong to helps us when we're dealing with the material world. So just to go over the houses again here. The 1st house, or the helm, the self. The 1st house is the rising sign, which is the sign coming over the eastern horizon at the time of birth, which is why it's so important to have the exact time of birth, because that ascendant sign moves pretty quick in with this primary motion. The ascendant, or the helm, is steering the ship being you and your life, and the sea is the ocean of life. So the 1st house represents the birth, the moment of birth, your body, your existence, your vitality, your appearance. This is why the 1st house is so important. It's the native themselves, the most personal point in the chart. Spirit, your psychology, your presence. All the other houses derive from the meaning of the relationship with this point. So then at the top of the chart, we have the 10th house, or the culmination point. The 10th house is the zenith, or midheaven, or MC. It's the culmination of the noonday sun, where when planets reach their highest visibility along the ecliptic relative to the ascendant. So it is the place of action and practice. Lived experience, the most public area of the chart. What are you doing during the day when you're out in public trying to make a living, so to speak? Karma and the fruits of your deeds. Topics include fame or infamy. So even, it could be it's the house of honors, but it could be like being a character in infamy, like Bonnie and Clyde. They weren't considered getting honors, but they were infamous for something. The rulers, so the 10th house is the rulers, the king, their authority, success, achievement, or notoriety, reputation, career, personal callings, public exposure, basically. Actions are judged, they're visible, exposed to the world, exposed to scandal. Any planets in the 10th house are considered at their most powerful position accidentally, what's called accidental dignity. You can have a planet in a sign that it might not agree to, but it will gain some power if it's in a quality or angular house. So now we get to the 7th house, or the setting position on the 7th house, or the descendant, or the western side, the western pivot point in the chart. This is where planets set or disappear into the underworld at the end of the day or dusk. Endings, transitions, submergence into something beyond the self. So if the first house represents the person and everything about the person, the opposite of that is everything not about the person, and that's the 7th house. Something beyond the self. Topics like marriage and partnership, romantic or business or contentious, because the 7th house is also open enemies. So that would also represent the 7th house. So there might be contentious relationships, litigation, lawsuits, opposing parties, thieves. But it's also leisure, celebration. The 7th house is very strong placement, creates deep bonds or deep oppositions. Planets in the 7th house are set powerful in endings or unions. So now we get to the 4th house, which is maybe the foundation of the underworld. It's called the anti-culmination. I don't really like that word. I like the subterranean place. I like that word better. It's the 4th house, or the IC. I forget the words for the IC because I can't pronounce it anyway. It's the lowest subterranean point in the chart. It's below the earth, so to speak, the opposite sign, the dark side of the earth. It's opposite to the visual sky. So we're not looking up at the sky anymore. Now we're looking at the earth. It's the foundation of all things, the beginning and the ending, the richness, hidden treasures, things buried in the earth, things of the earth. The ancestors, your ancestors are buried in the earth. Most of them, some of them. Family secrets are buried in the mysteries of private conversations that are not supposed to see the light of day. A lot of family inheritance has to do with land, if you will. Things that cannot be moved are represented by the 4th house. Private matters. Planets that are in the 4th house are considered at rest in the underworld before they are slingshotted or goaded back into the rising towards the ascendant. 4th house is the most hidden private part of the chart. Lineage, roots, family roots, home, invisible support, hidden support. In contrast, the 10th house is public support. The 4th house, it's the unseen foundation. So just to rehash it again, we have opposition and complementary. So the 1st and the 7th are the self versus the other. And the 10th house and 4th house is public achievement versus private endurance. And they are all shaped by the primary motion of the daily cycle of the sun, or the churning of the earth. Now we get into the succedent houses or the cadent houses. And their meaning is derived from the angular houses because of the primary motion, the diurnal rotation of the earth. So the succedent house is approaching or building towards the angle. The cadent houses, they were angular through primary motion, and now they're falling away or declining from the angle. That's why they're a little weaker, a little challenged, a lot more challenging. For example, so planets in the 8th house, they're feeling conflicted, uneasy, depressed, because they're being turned away from the power. They're in the decline of the 7th house as the primary motion is taking everything towards the sunset, if you will. So topics like fear and worry and anxiety about the future, things that make you uncomfortable, taboos, and talking about death and taxes and politics. That's how the 8th house is catching its meaning. Avoidance, uneasy. The 6th house is the cadent house of the 7th house angular triad. Now this house is cadent. It's falling away from the 7th house by primary motion, pulling away from the 7th house, a declining house. So planets in the 6th come into some kind of servitude. Topics like accidents and disease and illness. So the 5th house was the house of good fortune. The 6th house was considered the house of bad fortune. Labor that you don't get recognition for. And it's also considered the house of like doing your daily chores, beasts of burden and animals that you worked with, domesticated working animals, where Mars gets its joy. So this is the house that Mars likes to be in. Think of Mars as the soldier, and the soldier is sent off to war to give service, but at the behests of the generals, at the behest of somebody else. So they're going into service, but they're not necessarily in charge. So Mars thrives in this territory. The 6th house, the house of soldiers, obedience, sacrifice, and scarcity. So now if we look at the 4th house, angular triad, we have the 3rd house is the cadent house from the 4th. By primary motion, things are pulled away from the 4th house when they get to the 3rd house. Planets are gazing back at their family, back at the home. Topics of the 3rd house are siblings. Siblings are the byproduct of the family. Especially back in the olden days, people used to live in closer networks or extended families, and neighbors used to be family members or extended family members. And that's how neighbors, extended family members and stuff, that's how those topics fall into the 3rd house. Aunts and uncles and neighbors used to live nearby. Close community, messaging each other and communication in a small immediate locality was the reason we're getting the topics of the 3rd house here. But it is a cadent house. It's a little bit more passive. Short journeys. The 2nd house is the succedent house of the 1st house, angular triad. And by primary motion, it's going to enter the rising sign next. It's going to enter the helm. So topics of assets and money and accumulation over time and growing and expanding. Possessions that you can take with you or mobile possessions. Things that are coming into being. Material acquisition. The second house was also referred to as the gates of Hades. What that is it's a reference of material wealth, because most everybody prior to 100 years ago was a farmer of some degree, and things that came out of the ground were food, and food was considered riches. And if also the gates of Hades was when the sun came out of the depth of the darkness and then rose again over the horizon, it was considered coming out of the underworld. When the sun rose every day, it came out of the underworld. So the second house was considered the gates of Hades, because anything underneath it was the underworld. All succeedent houses, the second, fifth, eighth, and 12th, represent growth and building. Cadent houses, the third, the sixth, the ninth, and the 12th, represent declining or preparation. Primary motion dictates the strength that the approaching angle has. Positive momentum as opposed to falling away and loss of favor. So then we have the first house that represents the individual. So the second house is things coming to be over time. But the 12th house is the declining from the first house. These are things that pull away from that first house. That's why it's the house of the self-undoing. Because the planets there are looking at that ascendant as they're being pulled by primary motion into the cadent house of the 12th. It's being pulled away from where it was just at. So then if we go up to the 10th house, planets in the 11th house are looking at the planets in the 10th. Planets in the 9th house are being pulled away from the 10th house. That's why we would look at the planets in the 11th house as very beneficial, because they're heading towards that 10th house ascendant. And planets in a cadent house in the 9th would be lessening in power, but still there's a hierarchy. There's still a hierarchy, because there's a hierarchy for the angular houses. There's a hierarchy of the cadent houses as well. And the 9th house would be the most beneficial cadent house. So as much as we say cadent is not good, it's not strong, the 9th house would be the best cadent house of them all. So even though the 9th house is not as strong as the 10th, it's still technically not a bad house for a multitude of reasons. So I hope this video helped you understand the rationale behind the houses and the rationale behind primary motion and secondary motion, which all leads into why the houses have the meaning that they have, or at least that's the ancients' rationale and stuff. And see how it tied into whole sign houses. I didn't even really touch on the joys of the houses yet either. Or sect. I'll be getting to that the next couple of videos and stuff. I'm going to edit the shit out of this now. So hopefully I can find some slides that match what I want it to match. But hopefully you've enjoyed this video and found it as profound as I did back when I was first learning about it. I think this makes so much sense. I just found it mind-blowing. Feel free to leave a comment, hit that like button, subscribe, all those YouTube things. Graybeard Astrology. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.